how can we do layoffs in a way that build trust, that build the sense of inclusion and people's experience of mattering as the layoffs happen?
We take the idea of trauma and we put it outside the room. We send it away. It cannot be discussed.
Wow.
Because that's where therapists work. That has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Kind of acknowledging that this is part of the human experience, that there are things we're going to be celebrating and there are things we need to grieve. And making it easily making it part of team meetings.
Begin to enjoy being human instead of pushing a workforce towards a kind of roboticism.
Oh my goodness. It is Roxy Manning and Sarah Peyton together in the studio. This is a dream come true for me. Two celebrities. Hello, Roxy.
Hi, Rajkumari.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Rajkumari.
So this is a special episode. I will be asking questions, and I think that the two of you together in answering these questions will be just a treasure trove of gems, diamonds, and gold coins. And I am so excited to share all of your wisdom and perspicacity with the audience. So, Roxy, would you like to start us off by sharing a little bit about who you are?
Well, I am the author of How to Have Anti-Racist Conversations, and I've been working first as a clinical psychologist and then basically an equity and communications consultant. And I integrate things around racial equity, gender equity, nonviolent communication, and try to have people live lives that are meaningful, purposeful, and that build beloved community.
Oh, beautiful. I love that so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Sarah, would you like to share a little bit about what you do?
Yes.
And who you are?
Yes, I love it when brains get to be easier places to live. And so one of the wonderful projects that I've gotten to do with Roxy was to co-write The Anti-Racist Heart, which is a real invitation to folks to do the work of anti-racism and to begin to look at implicit bias and let go of their habits of unconscious microaggression. I don't know how much we can let go of this, but at least to try. And with self-compassion and a really good knowledge of their own brains.
That's beautiful. And the two of you run a podcast called Fierce Compassion. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
That's awesome, which I've had the honor of being on the show. So
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me.
That was an amazing episode.
It really was. I had such a blast. So today we're going to actually break up this conversation into 3 segments. We're going to cover 3 different themes. The first theme is around trust and inclusivity. And the second theme is around communication and feedback. And the third is around emotional and psychological well-being. So in our recording, I think I wrote down 568 questions that we never got to. In this recording, we will get through all of them. The two of you are never leaving until we finish all of the questions. So with that, let's start with trust and inclusivity, shall we? So I have had the incredible honor of working with companies in many capacities. One that is most challenging is to support them in partnership with when they're going through layoffs. And what I've noticed is that there is a significant disconnection when that occurs. And more importantly, that there is a break and a rupture in the trust across the workforce. How do we start to repair trust as an organization after we have just gone through layoffs?
I actually have a sense that I would want to wind back a little bit the breaks in trust happen in part because of the way so many layoffs are done. So I don't know that you have to have layoffs done in a way that automatically results in a break in trust. So I would love to see us actually say, how can we do layoffs in a way that create trust, that build trust, that build the sense of inclusion and people's experience of mattering as the layoffs happen. And I would love to invite people in those positions of creating layoffs to include the people who are going to be impacted in some of the decisions that are being made, and to do some creative problem solving, whatever the reason there is for doing the layoffs. Layoffs are one strategy to accomplish that goal. Are there other strategies? Are there other ways that we can work with this? Are there other folks who are saying, I'm actually ready to retire, and even though I've got seniority, maybe I'm not the person who needs to be kept, right? So how can we keep people in the discussion? How can we be transparent so that we don't have that break in trust that we then need to repair?
And once it happens, I think this really speaks to the importance of naming emotions and normalizing almost one of the things I like to talk about is how we take the idea of trauma and we put it outside the room. We send it away. It cannot be discussed.
Wow.
It must be ignored or dismissed or put behind a screen, because that's where therapists work. That has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
That people will say, well, I don't understand. This is a professional environment. I don't understand why these people are not going to their therapists. But there's something else that's really possible once we start to normalize emotions and say, emotions are really important. They bring us important information. Of course you miss your former boss. Of course you're trying to scramble to figure out how to work with a new team. Like, to acknowledge the awkwardness, to acknowledge the devastation, to acknowledge the discomfort of change, and speak to it so that we're not pretending that bad things are the premise, are where only therapists should work.
What this brings up for me is the question to the two of you around how do we start to introduce the concept of mourning in workplaces, and how do we begin to ritualize and practice mourning in a normalized way?
I think it's actually just introducing it. So mourning and celebrations are two things, like a lot of workplaces do very formulaic ideas about celebrations, but they don't bring in mournings. But kind of acknowledging that this is part of the human experience, that there are things we're going to be celebrating and there are things we need to grieve. And making it making it part of team meetings. Let's have a round of what we're celebrating. Let's have a round of what we would like to, like what we're grieving, what we would like to see differently, what we've lost. And building that into the practice of the organization can be helpful. Having leadership do that, having leadership say, hey, I want to mourn how I showed up. It could be about my own behavior. It could be the impact, but making it something that we actually do and that we acknowledge as part of being human.
Oh, I love that.
And part of what I think might be really sweet for companies and organizations is to begin to enjoy being human instead of pushing a workforce towards a kind of roboticism. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about this kind of sort of paradigm shift. In a way, I've been thinking a lot about the body of the leader. And that when the body of the leader is clear, when the body of the leader, as Roxy just so beautifully brought forward as a possibility, is able to say, well, I'm really celebrating that our reorganization is taking us toward something that feels really solid, and I really miss Joe. And I want everybody here to be able to name the person that they're missing or the people that they're missing. Turn to your friend. Tell them who you're missing. Just so that there's a sense of that we don't have to shy away from naming what's really happening.
I want to add to that because I think one of the barriers is people have this idea that if we introduce mourning, it's going to take forever, right? That people are going to go down this deep hole and they'll never dig themselves out. And I think it's the opposite, that when people have a place to grieve, to be seen about the impact of some of their experiences, they can let it go. It's when we can't let it go, when there is no place, that it's like, I finally get a moment and now I'm going to go deep because it might never happen again. So make it a regular practice so that we don't have so much pressure built up that we need to release at any moment.
This is fantastic. Thank you. Leaders who do not value empathy and who think that it is an absolute waste of time, how do you start to speak to those individuals in a way that highlights and showcases the value of empathy?
There's the cognitive understanding that there is an ROI if you can develop this practice. But I'm also curious about why the leaders are feeling so closed off from empathy. And a lot of folks have been told or have learned or had it reinforced that the only way I will be seen as a leader is if I am in this kind of business-like, robotic kind of way. They don't know that you can be different. They haven't had it modeled for them. And empathy can feel scary to them. They don't know how to do it. Yes. And so sometimes it might be, get that leader coaching. I remember we did that with one of our clients and just say, this is a skill you could learn. It's a learnable skill. It's not just innate. Some people have it, some people don't. And help them learn how to do it.
I love that. Yeah. Right now, organizations are contending with all of what is happening in the world. I will just say this, there is global devastation and global heartbreak happening across all communities. When I was running a compassion circle for one of the ERG groups at one of the companies, someone in the chat asked, I was talking about mourning, how to mourn. And someone asked, how do you even begin to mourn when people are being killed every single day? And then we ended up talking about ritualizing mourning. But how do you invite listening when there is so much pain happening?
I'm having this gut instinct that, again, I want to find out what the block is for that person, why they're in this denial, why they're not able to say, hey, this is happening out there. And I wonder if part of it is, again, that sense of overwhelm, that if I opened my heart and let myself acknowledge all of the harm that's happening, and especially the harm that my company might be complicit in, that would be so overwhelming. I would freeze. I would collapse. And if people don't think that they have the skills to be able to show up for that kind of pain, then we're going to try to push it away. We don't want to engage with it. So could you create mourning circles with things that are more local, things that are within? It's like, I'm already mourning. Maybe I'm grieving the loss of a parent, but start to show them, how can you start to mourn that you do have the capacity for this? And then as they develop kind of a shared culture of being able to support each other, you can start to widen what it is that we're paying attention to, what it is that we're mourning. So there's something around where the gap is and what are the skills that we need to teach them.
You are both incredibly fluent in nonviolent communication. How do you begin to work with people sitting on opposite sides of the spectrum? People who are in a polarized state, who don't yet understand how to come to a place of community or a place of willingness to communion with one another, that their polarization has become such an identified state of identity.
I think there's not necessarily a lot of leverage if I'm going to try to change people from a position, right? So it's like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I've got this identity or that. People are really entrenched with those identities. But if you can find, like, what is the specific issue or problem that this polarization is relevant to? when I look at the specific problem, that's when we can bring in nonviolent communication. That instead of it being about my identity, it's just like, what's important to you here? What are you valuing? And get them to talk about needs. I don't have to use needs language. I don't have to tell them that's what we're doing, but to really surface, independent of the identity, what's the thing that you value? And if we really get to that level of needs, there can often be resonance like, oh, well, that's important to me too. And then you could start to talk about, so how do we make this work? Like, what's the strategy that's going to get this thing that you both think are important, that will satisfy both of you? So it's really around getting them to pull away from this entrenched idea about the position to what's the exact issue? What's the exact goal that you have in this moment, and focusing there.
I remember I was in a women's prison teaching nonviolent communication during the primary when it was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in the primary. And at that point in time, it was in that year. And and all of a sudden, the political conversation broke out in the room, and half of the room was pro-Obama and half of the room was pro-Clinton, and it was intense. And I was like, not only do I not want these poor, lovely people to be having an argument, but if they start a riot, we're going to get kicked out of the prison. The whole nonviolent communication program is going to get kicked out. So the stakes felt high. So I started just to listen to the different sides and write the needs in huge letters on the boards. So somebody was like, we've got to have a woman in office. And I was like, equality. And and then something really wonderful about Barack Obama. And I was like, responsiveness, and just like these big letters and words that allowed the folks who were having this dialogue to begin to perceive one another as having really similar longings, even though their strategies were really different. And it was big letters, big colors, and a big voice. I was making big voice, of these needs to boom them out through the room. And the room went poof, poof.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they got to calm, and we got to go back to the lesson, and the program did not get kicked out of the prison.
That's a great story.
It was amazing.
How do you respond to someone who says, I don't see color, when speaking about representation matters?
So I'll talk about it in two ways. If I don't know them and we're equals, and I'm willing to be vulnerable, I might not always be, but if I'm willing to be vulnerable, I'll say something like, gosh, when I hear you say that you don't see color, I'm guessing that you want me to trust that you're seeing me as a human being and that you really value who I am and you're trying to put me at ease. Is that it? And I'm guessing they'll say yes, right? And so then I'll say, what's really hard for me about that is that part of my experience is that people, maybe not you, but other people do see my color and do treat me differently because of it. And if you tell me that you don't, then I don't know how I'll ever be able to see you as a support, somebody who could understand the ways that I'm being treated based on my color, if you don't see it and you can't talk to me about it. So it almost feels like we're cutting off part of my lived experience and part of what I would want to come to you about if you're somebody who's fully seeing me as a human being.
Wow.
And I would ask them to take that in. Yeah.
That's an incredible answer. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, one of the things that I always get so worried about is maternal mortality rates in the United States. It's just like one of the things that's so important, such a loss of people and beauty and moms and babies. And so when I hear this, one of the things that I like to begin to talk about is that it's a paradox. We want to be with people just as humans. But simultaneously, if we do not begin to speak about what's happening statistically for different, and look at things in terms of color, we're not going to know that the babies and the moms are dying. And we're not going to be able to take any steps to mitigate it. We're not going to be able to change whatever the patterns are that are leading to these really high mortality rates.
For sure.
So that's also one of the places I go.
I appreciate that. It sounds like what is so important to repair trust and to start to cultivate a greater sense of inclusivity is mourning, and to become really masterful in ritualizing and operationalizing mourning in workplaces. What are some ways in which we can start to implement mourning in the workforce, introduce it as a concept, and begin to have people practice it while they're trying to get their shit done?
Well, I was just out in New Jersey and working with a friend on a book where we're starting to talk about bringing these concepts into businesses. And just as Roxy was pointing to the circles, one of the things that happens in the business that's using resonance and emotional intelligence to run the business is that every day they do the circle before the team leaves. It's a standing circle. And so I think daily rituals are a possible thing to put into place.
Yeah. And I think there are a number of kinds of rituals that we could bring in. Sometimes when I think of rituals with like capital letters, right?
Yeah.
And they take a lot of time and everyone's like, I don't got time for that. But even little things like, is there a place where we could mark a loss that somebody had? Or, like some companies have kudo boards. And an organization I work for has one. And I used to think, oh, this feels so formulaic. But I actually read every single kudo on that kudo board. And I take it in and there's this kind of like, there's a celebration. So having a grieving board where people can say, here's a loss I've had. Here's something that's happened. Here's something I'm missing. Something where people just write it down and know there's a place to put that, where other people could see and choose to respond. Could be a pretty it doesn't take a ton of time to do. And it still gives people a sense to be human in the workplace, a strategy to be human in the workplace. And then also some of these kind of in-person things. One of the companies I worked for, I was the ED there for, I think, short time. But one of the practices was have a 3-minute empathy conversation, right? So you'd buddy up with someone, and at the start of your workday, you'd call each other for 3 minutes. Who doesn't have 3 minutes? Like that's, getting an extra cup of coffee.
Right.
And you would have just 3 minutes to say, here's what's up for me. Here's what's coming, what I'm bringing into work. Here's what I'm mourning. And it's surprising how much empathy you can receive in 3 minutes, just to be known, just to be valued. So little rituals, I think, can make a big difference.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Roxy, Sarah, thank you so much for being here and having this incredible conversation on trust and inclusivity.
Thank you for having us.
We're so glad to be here.